Sort of got it right. I think air pollution is becoming quite exciting. It never used to be very exciting, but we've become more aware of the fact that it does have quite major health impacts. In fact, the latest estimate of global effects is about 7 million deaths per year from indoor and outdoor pollution. So that's quite a lot of deaths. It's a pretty big issue. I think what's exciting about the talks that you've heard is that we're beginning to bring together the science, the modelling of the emissions and exposure, and the policy, which is, you know, what do we do if we change this road, put it somewhere else, or if we use a public transport system instead of personal vehicles. And I think that's really the challenge now, is to move from what's still a sort of very much a research activity into actually influencing the real world, and in particular the win-win situation of reducing fossil fuel use and at the same time reducing air pollution. So we're getting a short-term public health benefit from less urban air pollution of the types you've largely heard about in the last few minutes, but also reducing CO2 emissions, which is not such an urgent issue, but in terms of our future and our jobless future, it is kind of urgent. So I guess that's my question to the speakers, really, is how near are we to being able to apply this directly to policy, and what, if we're not quite there yet in some cases, what do we need to do? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Simon. I should have introduced him as our Nobel Prize winning speaker, because along with the IPCC, he was awarded the Nobel Prize, which is very distinguished. So I think that sets the frame nicely. We're interested in that link across from physical sciences, from the measuring of the data to information for air quality, and then going through looking at the policy implications. So open to the floor, and can you just briefly identify yourself for the rest of the audience?
Yeah, Chair. Ulrich, one of the top solution that you put in there was district heating systems, biomass district heating systems. Have you monitored before and after the installation of a district heating system that can show us what fixed measurements that actually, achieve?
Oh, did everybody hear that question?
Yes.
It's the before and after of putting in district heating system, and we have measurements about that.
It's very difficult to measure the effect of single measures because you have always changing meteorology. But in terms of Klagenfurt, I can say 15 years ago, Klagenfurt was one of the most polluted cities concerning PM in Central Europe. They made a lot of measures since then. Probably, which has at the moment the biggest impact is in Klagenfurt that we have in Austria particle traps, the regenerating ones, since 2006, and it started with 2004 that they were available on the market. Then Klagenfurt invested as well in district heating to get people using coal, black coal, for residential heating away, put them onto the district heating, and subsidize this as well. And also another measure is using CMA, that's calcium magnesium acetate. It's kind of a dust binder. They use that instead of winter sanding or salt. There's often ice and snow on the roads. Using salt or split or sanding causes even more fine dust during winter time. And if you look on a 15 years record, it looks really like that you have years it goes up because to adverse meteorology or awful meteorology, and then it goes again down. So there is a trend clearly visible. Also interesting is in the Klagenfurt area, at this station Ebenthal, which is east of Klagenfurt. It's a station, or it's there are 1,400 people living. There is no trend actually, and this is a residential heating hotspot. And so Klagenfurt is also interested in that the situation changes there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Just another question?
You've former regional councillor and very interested in transport and things like that. From what you've said about car use, it would seem that electric cars are a very good answer to some of this pollution, well, all of this pollution, because they don't have it. And it would seem too that the way to produce that electricity is by using photovoltaic. New Zealand has enough sunshine to do that fairly well. So that would seem to me to be an interesting solution to urban pollution on roads anyhow. And I just wondered what your thoughts on that might be.
Okay, so for those who didn't hear this, Hugh was asking about electric cars powered by photovoltaics. So maybe if you could do a quick answer and then we can open it up to
Yes, indeed, it's a good idea. Also depends how you produce this, the electricity. But important to note is that cars, the exhaust from cars is very low, and we breathe it directly in. That's really a difference. And even if you produce the electricity quite dirty, as for instance in Poland or East Germany, at least this produced electricity, which is dirty produced, the dirt is efficiently dispersed by these power plants, yeah? And you don't breathe it in at very strong concentrations at the level of your nose.
Thanks. Tamsin, is there any planning for electric vehicles?
Well, I'm not really part of that council,
Okay. Anybody want to comment on it? Okay. Simon, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One on the negative side with electric vehicles is that you're missing out on potential healthcare benefits from increased physical activity, which is very important. And so you really want to get people out of their cars and cycling and walking instead, or using public transport, walking to and fro. In terms of the question, I guess, for the scientists is, can we tell the policymakers what influence it would have on the air pollution exposures if we were to hypothetically make the whole of Wellington electric, i.e. just subtract all of the transport-related emissions? What effect would that have on population exposure? Can we do that yet, or are we not quite there yet? Yeah, I'm looking at TOTUS, various other acronyms.
I would normally speak up from there, but I've been with a sore throat. We can. Short answer, no. And actually, I bounce it back to the policymakers because they don't trust our advice. I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't trust it either. Mainly because Ulrich actually, it's because it's model-based, and it's always an inherent, distrust of something that you didn't observe. That's not to say that the models are not useful. They're extremely useful, particularly for that kind of scenarios. And that's what we try to build with our database system, is so that we can compare those different scenarios and integrate model systems that can give you an answer. They won't tell you what to do. That's for the policymakers to decide. But it will hint at what difference could possibly or conceivably make swapping the whole fleet for electrics or not.
Okay, thank you. And I know those of you who follow research, the latest ENVI round has actually a research bit in this area, changing powering of vehicle fleets. Yes. We've got three questions, so if we can make them quickly.
I got quickly in what's wanted. I read a lot of health impact assessments around air quality. Parkinson's, and in them, some people do particulate matter, and some people do include nitrogen dioxide as well, and then other people go, well, actually they're additive, or not, or they're actually so similar as far as their health effects, so we'll only do particulate matter. And these are the sorts of decisions that people are making when they're trying to inform policymakers. And I'm reading them and I'm not really sure whether they should be making those calls about whether or not particulates and are additive or if they're actually complementary, and so you should just do one or the other. Are they double counting or not?
So this is a question for about measurements that are used in health impacts assessment, about whether it should be particulates, NO2, whether they're additive, and how should they be interpreted by policymakers. Do you know what to
Maybe Guy might have some more information on this.
Okay, do you want
Okay, I really would like to have a chat with those people to explain in more detail. The thing is that very small number of pollutants actually have a direct impact, like nitrogen dioxide, which is toxic. All the rest are used in scientific circles as tracers of the sources. And in that sense, it doesn't matter if it's NO2 or particulate matter, if you're tracking that source. For any particular assessment, it would very much depend on what the source is. If I'm looking at traffic, I would normally look at nitrogen dioxide, particle number concentration, something that I can trace directly to that source. For other sources, it's conceivable that you could use them. So I guess that the non-committal answer would be, it may be double counting, but I wouldn't say that for every individual application of that.
Thanks, Gus. And there's a question up here. Sorry. We can continue this over our lunch. So, this gentleman in the floor.
My name is Sid from Regional Public Health. It's a twofold question. Gustavo, with the model that you've come up with, have you done a causal loop analysis with any new developments that are happening in any part of the country, and then tested how the outcome effects are coming out? And Carolyn, is there an area for the Wellington General Progress Indicator to have better air quality measures through what NIWA is working on?
This is kind of a question to
Yeah, it's twofold because it's connected.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Gus, do you want to go quickly first?
Okay. No, we haven't. No, and we haven't validated most of this and everywhere in the country. What we're looking at is generalizing our principles, so that when we do a lot of research in Auckland because our team's based there. So you could say that we validated some of our approaches with Auckland data.
Are they generic forms?
Yes, they are generic forms. And the demo page that's on our website is for Auckland region, but as I showed you, we've also implemented that same system for Christchurch. We're in the process of implementing that for Wellington and work with Philippa's team modeling approaches. So we're not aiming at generating something that's sort of thoroughly validated for an individual place, but a generic and transferable process and framework that would work on anywhere you have data for. And for the other one, I do.
Yes, we've been aware about the GPI indicator that doesn't really work that well for air quality as we're doing it at the moment. Then there's the exact problem that was talked about before. Do you use an observed value or do you use a modelled value? And the whole GPI is under review at the moment. They've just got through this round.
I'm still on that working group. So.
Yeah, so we'll be feeding into that working group. So any ideas from people like yourselves how we can actually better characterise exposure, perhaps an exposure reduction rather than just measurements at fixed site. Yes, we're certainly aware of that issue.
And Paul, the last question.
Paul Bruce, I'm from the Regional Council. My concern is with the Regional Council is at the present time where we measure in Vivian Street the air quality, it's on the northern side, and so the northerly one is a predominant one, and it would actually be better on the southern side, but I really hope that we do locate it to measure better the air quality from exhaust from cars. But the real problem is, for what I see, is where we have a lineup of diesel buses in places like Willis Street outside Unity Books, where we can actually get 14 buses in a row. And we do have trolley buses, which are the absolute best in terms of emissions. But sometimes we don't run the trolley buses. There's been a tendency to reduce the use of them, and they're not used during the weekends and in the evenings often. So that if you actually get a lineup of diesel buses and you're standing, you get that canyon effect, so you can get momentary high concentrations, and the bus drivers themselves will be always relatively close to the diesel emissions. And so I would really like to be measuring the PM2.5 in some of those locations right now to have a comparative. In our public transport plan, we have actually talked about lowering our emissions, but we are doing that by removing all the trolley buses, which means an immediate increase in emissions, because what's left is the diesel buses, and then moving to hybrids. And I'm not too confident in how fast we'll move to hybrids, but also they have emissions as well, and they vary according to different places, and sometimes they can still be as high as about 80% of what normal the bus is.
This looks like a discussion to continue over lunch, but a brief cost also from Tamsin.
Very quickly, I completely agree with a lot of what you're saying regarding we've got one fixed site. It's not going to represent, there's going to be places where it's higher, places where it's lower. It's actually very difficult to get a site in a city area. But one thing we are looking at doing is expanding our ability to look at the spatial variation by adding in to NZTA's passive nitrogen dioxide monitoring network. So we'll be looking at putting tubes down in Courtney Place and various other places like that, and then we can calibrate it against what we're getting at our stations, so we can get a better feel. And also building on the work that Ulrich's doing with his modelling, we're very keen to look at that to see actually, where it is worse and where we're monitoring. So, yeah.
And just finally, Ulrich's going to speak very briefly about work that he's done in the laboratory about diesel buses.
But we just start with NOx and NO2 simulations for Wellington, and also we extended the area which comprises now as well the Golden Mile, and so we have traffic numbers for buses from Wellington, and the problem is now what is the share of those trolley buses, and so we went to the Golden Mile and counted for some time and determined the share of the trolley buses, and it's actually, when we counted last week, it was very high. So in some places it was 50%, and in other places it was about 25%. And that may have, at the moment, quite some beneficial impact on air quality there.
Thanks very much. In Ulrich's laboratory, they're doing simulations about diesels going up and down hills and when they're idling and so forth, which is really interesting. Well, we could have gone on for much longer. I think you'll agree it's very stimulating, lots of issues that we need to do more work on, both in terms of the science and thinking through the policy implications. But we wanted to keep it to an hour because I know lots of people just have an hour for lunch. But those of you who can join us at the NICO for lunch, that would be really great. Can you join with me in thanking?